Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden.
And I'm Christina Hoff-Summers. And Danielle?
Today we have Sara Ziff, who's the founding director of the Model Alliance. But we're really going to be talking about this incredible, unexplored frontier of Me Too in the modeling industry.
Yeah, just this, you pull back a curtain and find this predatory jungle. I have no other words.
And what is incredible is it's not getting the same coverage as Hollywood or really any other industry, and yet it involves women and girls
and young men,
15.
Lots of young men.
Young men, and the young men are much more reluctant to speak out about it. But we're talking about young girls put in situations that are unspeakable, that make Harvey Weinstein look
like a choir boy. Well, I wouldn't say
PG.
That. But there are Harvey Weinsteins throughout the modeling world, and
it seems like there are 1,000 Harvey Weinsteins,
and they're not known. And this industry seems relatively slow in making changes.
What's great about Sara Ziff, so she was a former top model. She went to Columbia and got her BA, and then went on to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government.
They messed with the wrong model.
They totally messed with the wrong model, because she went on to found, after she sort of retired from modeling, and she was very upset.
At the very old age of, 26?
Yeah, I don't know. That's like so
elderly.
over the hill. She went on to found this group called the Model Alliance, and it was in 2012, so this is very before Me Too. And she produced a feature documentary called Picture Me that got at some of these issues. But she, with the Model Alliance, has been spearheading labor protections for children in this industry.
Basic protections you take for granted
in
every other industry, not in the modeling industry. Somehow they were able to exempt themselves.
In May, they were able to sign into law something called the Stop Sexual Harassment Act, but that was only in New York City.
That's probably where most of the models. I don't think they're in Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, maybe.
No, they're coming out of Bismarck. No, but
they're definitely coming out of it.
The point is,
beautiful girls
they work everywhere. And it's not just the top models that we're talking about where that seems glamorous, but even that, I'm sure, is not as glamorous as it seems, as things never are. But we're talking about the sort of workaday models, the catalog models, the models whose heads you don't even see in online shopping, and what they are put through. And I think let's hope we can do something to reveal what should be the next big Me Too movement.
And have a place for differently aged models. Like ourselves. No, that's another issue. Okay.
Christina wants to be a model. Okay. Let's bring on Sara Ziff.
Hi, Sara. This is Christina. Welcome to the Femsplainers.
Hi, Sara.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So this is such an under-talked about issue, especially post-Me Too, that you have been talking about what is going on with models since you formed the Model Alliance in 2012, correct?
That's right.
Why don't you give us some personal background about yourself and what you encountered, because you started modeling when you were 14.
Yeah, I grew up in New York and was scouted on the street, actually, just after school when I was 14 years old, and really didn't have any other work experience at that point other than, I guess, babysitting. And, I've had a good career, but I also experienced some of the pitfalls of working in what remains a largely unregulated industry, which is why I joined forces with other models and founded the Model Alliance.
Well, tell us about some of those experiences that alarmed you, upset you.
I think I had similar experiences to many models when I say that I was thrust into a very adult environment with adult pressures. When I first started working as a model, even as a minor, I was put on the spot to pose nude or topless.
This is when you were 14?
Had unwelcome sexual advances. I could kind of list countless experiences where I was not treated professionally and certainly not age appropriately.
Was it mainly the photographers or other industry professionals who were predators?
Well, there were photographers who were predatory, but there's also a lot of enabling that goes on at modeling agencies and with other stakeholders who unfortunately normalize bad behavior. And I and other models found that our agencies sometimes knowingly, I think, put us in predatory situations where we ended up experiencing sexual harassment or worse.
You know, I this could be a myth, but I had a friend that worked for the Eileen Ford agencies, the Ford agency, and that's was one of the older ones. And the story was that she was rather protective.
This was though, like in the 70s. When was it?
Well, she I think it was going strong through the 80s and possibly the 90s.
No, but your friend's experience.
She was there in the 80s.
Oh, okay.
And she said that if there were young women who were from foreign countries, they would live in her house. And models that were underage, she was protective. But then other agencies came along and they were quite the opposite, more exploitative. But
when you say complicit or that these agencies are putting girls into these situations, that's really shocking. I mean, an agency typically represents you know, not the client, not the designer, not the magazine. They represent the model. And why would they then be putting you into a situation that was knowingly dangerous? Or I assume there are photographers that are known to or whoever have these kinds of behaviors. Is it just known and they do it anyway? They don't care? Why would they do that?
Unfortunately, it's not just photographers. There are a whole range of industry stakeholders, whether they're makeup artists or hairdressers,
casting agents.
Casting agents, right. Sometimes the predatory people are the agents themselves. And unfortunately, the industry lacks accountability and there are legal loopholes that leave models particularly vulnerable to abuse.
Your film described all sorts of abuse that I had never thought about when there's just no regulation at all, that on these fashion weeks, the models, including you, would be like sleep deprived and food deprived, and then underage girls who were, just free to go out without, any supervision. We were invited to parties with drugs and all of that, 14, 15-year-olds.
Yeah, it's funny because the industry has a very glamorous image, and I think that there isn't a whole lot of sympathy for the plight of models. But the fact is that most models are very young. Most of them start working as minors. Often they are from a foreign country and they don't have any kind of support system with them or anyone really looking out for their best interests.
They don't come with their parents, right? They're shipped to Italy from Russia or Belarus or the Ukraine, and they can't speak the language very well, and they're put in, I think, model apartments, right, and in various cities, and they have no protection except the people who are supposed to be protecting them.
Right. And I don't want to get too wonky on you, but...
it's a wonky show. It's okay.
Great. Well, so modeling agencies are not like talent agencies in Hollywood that are required to act in the best interests of their talent. Actually, starting with the Ford agency, modeling agencies have escaped regulation by saying that their corporate structure is not that of a talent agency, but of a management company. And they say that, their primary role is not booking models' jobs, but just providing advice.
Wow.
And because
providing advice with a commission, probably a very hefty commission.
Right. So they take a 20% commission from the model and a 20% service fee from the client. And in many cases, unless you're a superstar model like a Kate Moss or Giselle, it often feels that the agency is representing the client's interests, sometimes more so than the model.
They only want you when you're 17, when you're 21, you're no fun. They take a Polaroid, let you go, say they'll let you know
there are plenty of stories out there, and I'm not really interested in pointing fingers, but the deregulation of the industry actually did start with Ford. And unfortunately, once Ford switched its corporate structure to a management company, then all the other agencies followed suit.
What do you mean when you say the deregulation? When did that happen?
I believe it happened in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, okay. Long time ago.
And what did that mean? They weren't held to these standards that you're talking about?
Safety standards or
liability?
Right. Well, I mean, so the agencies, they have power of attorney, and they certainly do book models jobs and actually exert a great deal of control over their working lives, but they're not required to act in their best interests. And we've seen time and time again agents putting models in really compromising situations. And sometimes it's not just sexual abuse. It's, pressures to lose weight, even models who are underweight. It's pretty pervasive, this pressure to tone up, as they say in the industry, which is sort of code for get your measurements so tiny that you'll fit into these little samples, which most models can't naturally fit into past the age.
All right, I have a question about that. Who promotes that look? Presumably the agencies or even the photographers want you to be very thin because the clients, the magazines, the fashion directors, the clothes designers, so who's pushing this emaciated look? Or is it just an ideal that we pursue because it's, that's what some
the current ideal is.
Yeah.
Like in the 50s when it was Jane Mansfield.
I don't think models were ever quite as, and Jane Mansfield was as unique, but don't the clothes look better on thinner bodies, or is that an industry myth?
Well, beauty ideals have changed over time. There is no one standard of beauty, and I think we should be questioning why an adolescent physique, someone who doesn't really have hips or breasts, would be presented as the feminine ideal of beauty.
Before we get into the weight issue, because I want to do it, but it's familiar to everybody.
Camille Paglia says because the industry is run by women and gay males.
Well, that may be true. Well, probably is. But what I want to get into is this side that really isn't fully understood. And we've sort of talked around it, but in sort of more legalistic. But let's be very graphic. You said when you were in New York City in May, you were helping with something called the Stop Sexual Harassment Act, which we can get into in a bit. But you said, photographers pressured me to pose nude and provide sexual favors. Some models have been treated like escorts with their agencies, sending them to known predators and putting them in compromising situations that no child, no person should have to deal with. And the model Karen Elson has said that if you protest this, that you're not just putting these young and naive or girls who are, even if they have the wit to protest, are scared to, because if they do protest, they can be branded as difficult or, that again, the agency is not on their side. And so these people, whoever it is, have incredible power to demand these things from them. And the model is fairly helpless because she won't get work.
Or he, a lot of young men.
Right.
Male models.
But let's have, I'd really like to hear some literal stories, whether it's from you or from other models you've spoken to. And don't worry about being graphic. What has happened? What has been asked of them?
Well, I mean, I made a documentary called Picture Me that came out several years ago now. And in it, my former roommate, a model, Senna, spoke in a very unfiltered way directly into the camera about her agency sending her to a casting with a very well-known, influential photographer. And she describes him asking her to take off her clothes, and then he surprisingly took off all of his clothes and asked her that she touch his penis. And she said she felt disgusted, but there were also enablers around who were making it seem like this was totally normal. And she went along with it and then later returned home and told her agency what had happened. And apparently they didn't seem to see the problem. And this was my agency as well. And this
Which
is the
agency?
That it represents a lot of well-known people, well-known models in the industry. So,
which agency?
We're not just talking about what's happening on the fringe of the industry. This is really happening at the highest levels of the business.
Can you name the agency?
I can name them now. We might want to bleep it out. I don't know what the legal issues are there, but Next Models.
Well, the New York Times had an amazing story about, I'll name them because it was in the headlines. Mario Testino and Bruce Weber were photographers who sexually exploited young male models. And everyone knew it and sort of went along with it. And it's a massively well-documented, well-sourced story. And it's part of this Me Too industry reckoning.
But why isn't it reckoning? Like, why aren't these men being, or whoever they are, perp walked the way that Harvey Weinstein and other, how it's happening in the entertainment industry?
Well, maybe it did.
It hasn't, though. It really hasn't.
Well, according to the story, Calvin Klein and other, major companies have stopped hiring these photographers.
Yeah, but that's 2 photographers. And what Sara is saying
is a whole world.
It's rampant, and it's enabled by a whole network of these incredibly reputable agencies. I mean, I also know, I mean, my daughter, Miranda, who modeled for 3 years, she was based in Tel Aviv, which modeling in the Middle East has its own its own horror stories, but she's now working with you at the Model Alliance. And she would say that she went into it later, which was a mercy. She didn't start modeling, I think, till maybe 21 or 20.
An older woman.
An older woman, yes. She did it mostly for the travel opportunities, although that turned out not to be so glamorous as Sara's saying. But she at least felt she had some maturity, and of course she had parents watching out for her and reading her contracts. And just from the legal level, we were always knocked out at how many bad contracts they were trying to put past her. And then how many sketchy situations she would be put in, including when she was in Paris. She was asked by one of the top agencies in Paris to go to nightclubs with men. And had she been younger and stupider or more naive, she would have done it. But also saying no came with its consequences. Or photographers would say to her, they'd send her very flirty texts after a test and implying these were big deal potential assignments, suggesting that if, she went along and did things, then she would be a sort of shoo-in for the job. And this is something that we are not supposed to be tolerating now. And the women in this industry are far more vulnerable, I would say, than most actresses. I mean, as you say, we're talking about 14-year-olds. So I want to see the anger. I want to see this become as big a deal as it has in other industries. Sarah, why hasn't it? And what can you and we do to make this happen?
One of the things that we do at the Model Alliance is offer a grievance reporting service where we hear directly from models and other folks in the industry about abuses, and people are seeking assistance. And as recently as just a couple of days ago, we had people reporting similar stories. So this is all happening in real time. And unfortunately, it can't be addressed in a piecemeal manner. We've tried over the last 6 years, and the problem is so massive, so systemic, that it really calls for a more comprehensive approach. And that's why we have recently, with over 100 other models, we drafted an open letter to the industry announcing the Respect program, which is essentially a blueprint for how to protect models and their colleagues from sexual harassment and other forms of abuse.
Please join the Femsplainers.
Yes, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or your favorite podcast hangout.
And follow us on Instagram at the Femsplainer Podcast.
And find the Femsplainers on Facebook and Twitter at Femsplainers.
And learn all about us at femsplainers.com. Thank you.
Be a Femsplainer.
When you say it's systemic, it reminds me of other industries where it's not that well known, but like in ballet. And I remember reading a biography of one of my favorite dancers of all time was Suzanne Farrell. And George Balanchine, arguably the greatest choreographer of the 20th century. He was very old when she was his muse and he was choreographing for her. He would not allow his favorite dancers to marry. They couldn't marry. He then divorced his wife and told people he was engaged to her. It wasn't true. And she had to pretend that she didn't have a husband because she did secretly marry, and then he found out, and and the thing about it is this was all taken as sort of acceptable, that, oh, well, he's this, this creative genius, and these are his ways, and this is this relationship between the genius and his muse. And it was systemic, and it's taken a lot. It may take years to change the culture of ballet, and I think there's a similar thing in modeling. This thing with photographers and these, gorgeous models, and it was all just thought to be.
Well, also, maybe this is also when you say systemic, where the weight stuff plays in, because also one of the things I remember from reading what, you've been through, Sara, and my daughter, that the agencies use the weight issue as a kind of way to almost completely dominate and manipulate you. So you can just say one thing to a girl. I mean, you get measured. When she was working in Japan, she got measured, I think, every week. And if you had, God forbid you had a donut or something and you were 8 ounces heavier than you had been the last week, and they'd bring out calipers and things. And they could say, oh, you've gotten fat. And they would say something so devastating. So you are also, it's
always on edge.
It's almost like some cult where you're kept on, you're deprived of food, and you're kept dancing. If you gain this or that, that's it. You're fired. Your whole career is over. And sometimes this would happen to a girl in a country where she, like we were saying, she doesn't speak the language, and she'd be sent, she'd be said, that's it, you're sent home. And it would all be over because of
sometimes
a
with
pound.
Earnings withheld. Yeah, and sexual harassment and this kind of abuse around models' health, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. All of this is very much tied to the lack of financial transparency and accountability as well. So I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that many models work in debt to their agencies.
Oh, I know. I was shocked to learn about that. Like debtor's prison.
Yeah, I spoke with Ashley Mears, who's a former model turned sociologist who wrote a book about these issues. And in her research, she found that 1 in 5 models working, I believe this was in New York, was in debt to her agency. Now, obviously, if you're in debt, you're that much more vulnerable to abuse and to succumbing to inappropriate demands, whether it's about losing weight or providing sexual favors.
Right, and you're staying in their apartments that they often, I remember Miranda would be sent to a model's apartment. There may be, it's like sweatshops, there may be 10 girls in a 1-bedroom apartment, and you're charged for that space. And often not fair renting practices. You're charged quite a lot, which is then deducted from the fee that you have, you're being paid. So it's almost Victorian.
Yeah, no,
that's right. That's right. Dickensian.
People have likened it to indentured servitude, which sounds extreme, but I think there are certainly ties to trafficking. When you get lower down the food chain, it can be pretty dark.
That's right. I think that a lot of people imagine that the life of a model is so glamorous. And I must say, watching your film, it did look pretty fabulous. And you looked fabulous. And going, Milan and Paris and London but you were operating at the highest level. And you were in the top shows and the publications. But imagine someone who's not quite making it, but they'll be third tier. And
describe the bottom of the food chain.
Yes, the bottom of the food chain.
Well, a huge problem that maybe people who are working at legitimate agencies and who are kind of doing the more glamorous professional work they might not be aware of is this problem of scams, modeling scams.
Right.
Again, because the modeling agencies are not licensed or regulated, really anyone can own and operate a modeling agency and present themselves as a professional in the business. And obviously, it's an aspirational industry. Many more people want to work as models than are going to get legitimate modeling work. And so we get a lot of questions and complaints about phony casting directors and agents who are promising, pipe dreams to folks and then essentially stealing their money.
Well, I remember Miranda getting stopped on the street in Washington, D.C. So it's not the usual scouting area for future models, future nerds, yes, but not future models. And it was a scammy agency. She was maybe 15 or something. And they promise you they'll take you to model classes and they'll do your portfolio. And it's only going to cost you $4,000 and $5,000. Then you'll be launched. And I remember having to try and tell my 15-year-old daughter, honey, if they want you, you don't have to pay for your photos. They'll do it for you. So yes, that preying on the dream factor of so many young women.
This was in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
Oh, I would think you have
I think they're everywhere.
Fake think tanks set up and going up to kids.
We see you as a future Soviet scholar.
And tell them that, they're going to be published and just pay us $4,000.
The biggest journals, the biggest quarterlies.
We're going to set up panels.
But it's preying on little girl dreams, right? That these are little girl dreams, that it's sort of
absolutely
princess dreams. I'm going to be traveling the world.
And, these little girls still dream of that.
Right.
I'm not a little girl. I'm old. I still think it would be so much fun. However, I did look and see in your film, there's a lot of sitting around and waiting and going and schlepping and constantly getting your hair done. It might get tedious.
Yeah. It really, it all depends on who you're working with. I have to say, I found most of it pretty mind-numbing. I mostly worked as a model because I got invited into this, exciting world, and I was glad to have the chance to do it. It's also one of the few industries where women out-earn men. Modeling is what allowed me to not just pay my bills, but also put myself through college and grad school.
And impressive degrees that you have, Sarah, from Columbia and Harvard. That goes against type. You're like legally blonde.
She's legally blonde. She kind of hit the genetic jackpot there. I mean,
again, I don't want to suggest that the industry is all bad. I certainly benefited a lot from it in many ways, but I also just decided that I wasn't going to stay silent about abuse that, I think I was maybe in a better position to speak out about because I am from here and, I have other options. It's not like I'm sort of just catching the brass ring while I can and putting all my eggs in this basket. I think a lot of girls really, they're dropping out of school and sort of shortchanging their futures at a chance at success in an industry that can be highly exploitative.
And where your career lasts 4 or 5 years. And sometimes if you're a superstar, it can be more.
Most models, by the time they hit, their mid-20s, they're considered, retired.
But to go back to what the sort of maybe lower tiers, not just the bottom, that a lot of models who are making a living are not, as you say, they're not the glamorous, Giselles. They're not even you. They're doing catalog work. They're doing, they're schlepping around doing calendars and website, those headless pictures that you see when you want to buy T-shirts on Zara or whatever. Like, they're doing a lot of that.
Well, apparently, increasingly, they're using cyborgs for that.
Well, that might be a good thing because you can't roofie a cyborg.
Wait a minute. Do you think that that field, all these problems can be solved by using robots?
Maybe.
No, I don't know what no robot could be.
No, but cyborgs in the catalogs, Sarah. Although I guess it takes money away, but as I said, you can't roofie a cyborg or send it out.
I don't know.
Be an escort with men.
I think they have rights too. I'm working on a paper on that.
They take a Polaroid, let you go, say they'll let you know, so come on.
Sara Ziff is the founding director of the Model Alliance, and we're talking with her about the unknown issues and the next frontier of Me Too in the modeling industry. Tell us about, first, your legislative achievements that you've done and what you think needs to be done further to start tackling these enormous issues that face models, aside from, I would suggest, getting Ronan Farrow on the case for the New Yorker.
And tell us about the villains, people who are pushing back and trying to hold on to the old ways for whatever purposes.
Our legislative advocacy really started when we looked at the laws on the books several years ago and found that underage models were not covered under labor law, shockingly, in New York State, which is really the center of the fashion industry.
Wait a minute, they're not covered at all by child labor?
No.
Are they exempt or something?
No, they were cut out of labor law.
That wasn't the Ford agency that did that, I hope.
Why are you so dedicated to the Ford agency?
I believe in Eileen Ford. It was like a finishing school for my girlfriend.
We're in Washington. It was the Gerald Ford agency.
It was a Gerald.
Or the Betty Ford. Sorry, go
Betty
on, Sarah.
Ford is more from me.
Sorry, go ahead.
But we championed the Child Model Act in 2013, which extended child labor protections to models as child performers, just like actors and singers and dancers. So now, models under 18 working in New York have to have a child work permit and provisions for trust accounts and, chaperones if you're under 16 years old. So there is a degree of protection. It's not perfect.
That's great, but you're saying that's only in New York. So we go back to the Dickensian aspect of children working in other states do not have these protections? There's no employment for them?
They don't have to stay in school or have tutors if they haven't.
Well, maybe education, but what about these other things? Sorry.
Oh, I know all of these things.
Sure. And the child labor issues are not the only pressing problem. So more recently, I teamed up with a law professor and some folks at Fordham Law School, and we did some legal research and found that models were also, because of the sort of unique multi-level structure of hiring between models and agencies and clients, models lacked protection against sexual harassment in the workplace.
Which is crazy. I don't even...
The more we dig, the more we find that this just seems to be sort of uncharted territory and that we're incredibly vulnerable. So, we've just last year, shortly after the Weinstein story broke, we introduced the Models Harassment Protection Act, which would protect models from sexual and other forms of harassment on the job.
But this was only in New York City, right? Like, it's like a great initiative, but we're still talking about very small regions?
Sure. I mean, New York City is obviously a hub.
Ground zero for modeling.
But there's a huge amount of work to be done, and this is a global industry where, models often, it's not like you just work in New York. You're often booked for jobs all over the U.S. and even all over the globe. You might be working in New York on a Monday and Paris on a Wednesday.
That's if you're lucky, or you could be in Istanbul on the Friday, and that's terrifying.
Right. So, I mean, legislative advocacy is important, but we've really taken a step back and thought about how we can address this in a more comprehensive way that really reaches models wherever they're working around the world. And changing legislation is tough, and I think that there would need to be a lot more advocacy in various different markets before we'd see significant change. So that's why in part why we've introduced the Respect program, which would require agencies and publishing companies and brands to sign a legally binding agreement to uphold a code of conduct. And this is, we've seen initiatives in the industry so far that sound good on paper, provisions for notifying models in advance if they're going to be asked to pose nude and other similar protections. But all of it is essentially meaningless and nothing more than a PR move if you don't have any kind of enforcement power and if there aren't real consequences if people violate the code.
Is there a place right now where models can go to file complaints other than just anonymous complaints on internet websites?
Yeah, I mean, it's really awful. We've seen these long lists of accused predators popping up online, and in some cases, I'm sure that those allegations are credible. In others, people's careers have been ruined. We really need an independent body that not only receives complaints, which we currently do, but that can conduct impartial professional investigations. And so the Respect program would allow models and really anyone in the industry to bring forward complaints, whether they were a victim or they were a bystander. And that way, these complaints can really be followed up on, and then we can issue remedies, where there are meaningful consequences.
But I think this has maybe been, I hope for you too, the inspiration of Me Too is sometimes you're trying to build these legal systems and you can't. What it really takes is this public reaction to say this is enough, and everything that is going on in this industry that you describe should be enough, And
you must have felt the change. I mean, you've been doing this for several years, and now in the post-Weinstein environment, aren't people more receptive to your message?
Well, I've been banging this drum for a long time, and for many years, the industry was not willing to listen.
They had no incentive, right?
Said that I was, making this up or overblowing it, and that, our models don't have any of these problems. Well, now I think, we're seeing companies actually coming to the Model Alliance very much wanting to work with us or be associated with us, and are willing to talk about what meaningful, lasting change actually entails.
How can we help you, Sara? What's the best thing our listeners and everybody can do?
Her website and info.
Oh.
Yeah. This is your chance for an unpaid political announcement. Unpaid commercial announcement.
I would encourage anyone to check out our work at modelalliance.org. We have a lot of information about our various initiatives. If you want to learn more about the Respect program and read the open letter from over 100 models, including some of the biggest names who are supporting this initiative, you can go to programforrespect.org. And that really outlines the sort of blueprint for how we plan to address these problems, and which is really, it's new to the fashion industry, but this is actually an approach that has been used in other industries like agriculture and the garment industry, for example, to address seemingly intractable issues like sexual harassment very successfully, actually.
We can end this on your own words, actually, when you were speaking about the Sexual Harassment Act, and you said, this is so poignant, it sounds like something from 1876 or something. It says, you said, too often models have been treated as objects and not as legitimate members of the workforce who deserve to be treated with the same dignity, respect, and basic legal protections other workers enjoy under employment laws. It's crazy that this industry does not have those basic rights.
Absolutely.
Including the same protection against sexual harassment that anybody in any business corporation in the United States has.
Well, thanks to people like Sara, I think there will be change.
Right.
And I'm going to work on the think tanks next.
All right, Sara, thank you so much for joining us, and anything we can do to help, we would love to do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so much,
Sara.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
They only want you when you're 17. When you're 21, you're no fun. They take a Polaroid and let you go. Say they'll let you know. So come on.
Someone has called the fashion model industry an ugly industry for beautiful people. And it's kind of true. What people don't understand is it is 19th century in the sense of wild, unregulated.
Right. No
Anything
labor
goes.
laws. I mean, if you're, as we know now, and this is good, if you're working at any level in any North American company and some boss does something even mildly inappropriate, you have, their
HR department.
There are so many avenues. And yes, there are still problems. And yes, you can, as we see, that women and people can still be punished if they come forward.
We've made progress.
We've made progress. As I was saying, just briefly with Miranda, watching what she went through. And it wasn't just, the Tel Aviv-based agencies some were more reputable than others, but they were plugged into all the international agencies. She worked with Next. She worked with many well-known agencies, depending where you went in the world. And her father and I were chronically horrified and shocked, let alone, I do think they use the eating disorder as this kind of, like North Vietnamese mind control of you, of constantly running you down.
And it happens to young men, too. There's a network of predators, some famous photographers. The Times had a expose. So I think that she's doing very good work in an area that no one thinks about. They think it's glamorous and wonderful. And a lot of parents have daughters who aspire to be models. I still think it can be glamorous and fabulous.
What was that song, Mrs. Worthington? Don't let your daughter grow up into the stage. Like really old song, like I'm real.
I only know. What is it? Don't let your son. Don't let. What's the one about cowboys?
Oh, don't let your son. Okay, bottom line, don't let your daughters become models unless they are very well protected.
And watch over them because
Right.
no one else is.
Right.
And it's kind of true in think tanks with research assistants.
Well,
I'm a
you
little bit
abuse your
worried.
think tank assistant.
I do.
Nick,
I
who's
give
here.
him. He's here. He's sitting
Chuckling.
here.
He's pretending to chuckle, but he's really terrified.
Yes, we recruited him at a young age. He was just a recent University of Chicago graduate. He didn't know the ways of the world.
And the levels of our abuse are like he sometimes works weekends, right?
Well, I'll
Sometimes.
or 2 a.m. I'll say, I need this article. Do you have it? And he sends it.
Wow.
Partly because he stays up all night.
That's
What's up with that?
the next Me Too frontier.